All right, if I can interrupt you for a few minutes, then we'll let you have your dessert, continue eating. Just want to continue looking through our study of the book of Proverbs on these lunches. We're going to look at 3 verses today, so you're good for the next 2. We'll do nothing, right? So now these verses go together. We're looking today at Proverbs 18 verses 6 through 8, which says this: a fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. So I wanted to treat these 3 verses together because they're the same theme. It's our mouth, right? Now we're using it to eat and talk, but we can get ourselves into trouble with both of those too, right? The first 2 verses refer to the fool, and the third refers to the talebearer, or the gossip. Hopefully none of these verses refer to any of us, but just in case, we will take a look. At least that's how I think when I study the Bible. I think, well, this doesn't really apply to me, but I'll study it anyway, right? And then you realize it's all about my problems. Anyway, Proverbs, of course, says a whole lot about the fool. You can go through the Bible in the book of Proverbs, and you can see a lot about the fool. The fool, here's a couple truths about the fool in the book of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. That kind of sets the tone. So here's some others. Fools hate knowledge, Proverbs 1:22. Fools will be their own undoing, chapter 1, verse 32. Shame is the legacy of fools, 3, verse 35. Fools need to be corrected, chapter 7, verse 22. Fools spread slander, chapter 10, verse 18. Fools always think their way is right, 12:15. Fools have no self-control, 12:16. Fools can't keep their foolishness quiet, chapter 12, verse 23. Fools don't depart from evil, chapter 13, verse 19. Fools hang around other fools, chapter 13, verse 20. The way of the fool is deceit, chapter 14, verse 8. And on and on. You can just make a long list here. Here in verse 6, we see that the fool invites trouble. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. We have people in mind, maybe as we read this verse and think about maybe experiences we've had. We probably all know people that are a little like this. Perhaps at times they've described us, right? We would probably admit that. The fool's lips are his words, what he says. That's how it leaks out. His words, according to this verse, the fool's lips enter into contention. They go in. It's the verb to go in. They move from a place where everything was fine to a place of trouble. And it's contention, or it's strife. There was peace. The fool speaks, and now everything's different. Now the conversation has entered strife. The fool is probably contradicting somebody, what somebody else has said. Maybe wants to dispute something, wants to stir things up, right, for whatever reason. Now, I don't think this is to suggest that all strife, every time there is strife in a conversation, is because there's fool. Sometimes we simply disagree, or there's things we ought to speak about, and not everybody's going to agree with us, so we speak the truth, and people think we're fools, right? But that's why we should be careful to speak the truth. The Apostle Paul spoke the truth many times, and the other apostles, and got them into big trouble. So this is not to tell us to stop speaking truth. But the context here is the fool who's stirring up trouble, probably intentionally, to put himself or herself forward to be part of whatever they want to be a part of. Maybe they want everyone to know that they know it all, whatever it might be. Well, the response, it's contention, but it says his mouth calls for blows, for strikes. In other words, somebody wants to punch him in the mouth. I mean, that's a very common reaction. Sadly, I see this from time to time, even where I live. The other day I looked out the window and I saw down the road this domestic dispute that was an old mom and dad and their son. The son was just verbally abusing. I was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought pretty sure somebody was gonna strike somebody, but it didn't go to that. But I said, that's exactly, this son was just berating his parents for some reason. So, if verse 8 is a companion to this, it's about the talebearer. In other words, I think the point is the fool's lips shouldn't be uttering things. That's the takeaway. There are some things that need to just be kept in. Or they could be words that... Okay. I must have uttered something. In contention with the sound system. The fool's mouth calls for feedback, right? The fools don't typically weigh their words, they just blurt it, right? Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but this is what this verse is talking about. We see this tendency often in the media. They want to rush. Somebody wants to be the first to tell you something. And they don't always know what they're talking about, but they're hoping it's true, and then it ends up not being, and we know the cycle. Then it becomes, whatever. But, so verses like this remind us to be very careful. Their method of operation is deceit. Chapter 14, verse 8. They intend, sometimes they want to deceive by what they say. We also learn in 18:2 that fools have no desire to understand, but they simply want to express themselves. They want to speak. They don't have ears to hear, they just have a mouth to speak. And so then this leads to verse 7. A fool's mouth is his destruction, or his ruin, and his lips are the snare of his soul. All of these body parts, the mouth, the lips, explain obviously where those words come from, our mouth. The foolish things that the fool says leads to his destruction, his ruin, his undoing. Instead of his words building up, they tear down. And notice, though, that they may hurt somebody else. Verse 7 says that they actually undo himself. And that's how often God works. He takes our own sin and makes it our own undoing. We step in the hole that we dig, right? Proverbs 1 talks about setting a net in the full view of the birds. You're going to fall into it yourself. In other words, the fools destroy themselves. His lips are the snare of his soul. And of course, a snare is a trap. We want to trap an animal, right? The words of a fool are that very thing. The last verse does not refer to a fool now, but verse 8 refers to a talebearer. This is a gossip, a slander, somebody who spreads rumors. And the word literally speaks about somebody who speaks lowly, quietly, right? Words spoken in low tones because the speaker knows that the information should not be broadcast. Right? Somebody says, hey, did you hear? Did you hear? You don't usually put it on the microphone. You just do it quietly because you've got something you just need to tell somebody. But in many cases, that can hurt somebody. We can very easily ruin someone's reputation by spreading gossip about them that we would never utter in public. And we might not even know it's true, but it just seems like we want to let somebody out. We want to let somebody know. This verse describes what the gossip's words are like. New King James says, verse 8, that The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles. The King James says that they are wounds. And George could explain that there's two different verbs that there's a dispute which verb actually it is, but I think both of them make sense too. This is a form of a verb that says eating things that taste good, right? We've just eaten many things that taste good. That's the words of a talebearer. They're delicious, right? And who doesn't want something delicious? But it's kind of like the book, right? We'll see in Revelation, right? Eat the book. Tastes good in your mouth, but when it gets to your stomach, it's bitter. It does harm. Another commentator says, things greedily devour. The idea is, we get the inside scoop, and we really shouldn't be divulging ourselves of it. We should be passing it along. That's the case. When we get the inside scoop on something, we feel like we're one of the few people who know it, and we don't want to hang on to it, and so we gotta let somebody know it. We leak it, right? Sources tell, right? We see this all the time. So this is a warning. And one commentator says this: hearing gossip is like eating a delicacy, something not everyone else hears. Therefore, like food being digested, gossip news is assimilated into one's innermost parts. We retain it, we remember it, and sadly often it ruins and hurts other people. This is why gossip is so destructive. It establishes within us a new reality about a situation that may or may not be true. And it's very hard to repair somebody's reputation when words have gotten out that may or may not be true. So, what's the takeaway in all this? Don't be like that, right? The Proverbs don't often tell us, don't do this. They just say, here's what a fool is. Colossians 4 verse 6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So let us be men and women of the truth, right? There are some times when we don't need to say anything. There are some times when we need to say something. We often get them backwards. I do, right? So thank the Lord for the truth that He gives us in Scripture. I think of this is the last verse, John 1:14. Think about the very person of Jesus. The Word became flesh. God spoke to us by sending His Son, and of course, sending us the written Word, and we know it's truth. So when we're tempted to get off and to be the fool or be the gossip, look to our Savior, look at the Scriptures, and may our words be kind and edifying and building up and not tearing down. So, may the Lord help us in that way. All right, that's what we have for now. So let's continue in your lunch, and whatever's next is next. So, I see more things back there.